So, for our online participants and those in the room, hello and welcome to the New York Foreign Press Center. My name is Najla Abdusamad. I will moderate today's briefing. A special welcome to members here in the room with us, and also for those in Washington, D.C., and across the United States. Today, we'll hear from Amy Reinhart, Senior Product Manager for AI Strategy at the Associated Press. She will explore how the introduction of artificial intelligence is impacting the practice of journalism. Amy Reinhart is a frequent contributor to public dialogues about these cutting edge technologies. Amy is not a U.S. government official and does not represent the official policy views of the U.S. government. If you are tuning in online, please make sure your digital profile states your full name and media organization and country where it is based. This briefing is on the record. It will be transcribed, and the transcript will be posted at fpc.state.gov. After opening remarks, I will moderate the Q&A session. Welcome, Amy Reinhart.
Thank you so much.
Over to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. It's nice to meet you. Nice to be here. I couldn't resist Najla's wonderful invitation. We've been talking about doing this since late October and just trying to find a time that met up with everyone. So if we go to the next slide. One of the things I wanted to mention is that the Associated Press is a not-for-profit cooperative. We are owned by our shareholders who are members and customers, 3,500 members in the United States. We have offices in more than 100 countries, so we have a global footprint. And we are one of the oldest news operations, going back to 187 years, if I have that number exactly correct. So it definitely has this moment for generative AI definitely brings up that cooperative spirit that really is the foundation of the Associated Press. So generative AI, that's why we're here. Well, we're here really because of ChatGPT. Similar to if anybody remembers the black computer screens with the command line and you had to be able to type on green text, that was the beginning of the computer age. But what made everybody able to drive a computer was Microsoft Windows. So this whole, I think the advancement of technology is really rooted in user interface. So how are you going to interact with these tools? And even though generative AI has been around for about 3 years, this interface, ChatGPT, really enabled people, including myself, to see how phenomenal and scary these systems can be. And I think that is really why we're here, is the user interface of ChatGPT really escalated the conversation because we were all able individually to see the power of these systems. So generative AI is a type of neural network, a really large one. There's a lot of words that bring up humanizing qualities to it. Neural network is one. Hallucination, which we'll go over, is another. And in your reporting, I encourage you to not use that type of language. Artificial intelligence is a subfield of computer science. It's not that much more exciting than that. It is rooted in data. A friend of mine likes to say, we didn't eat soybeans until they called them edamame. This is similar. We had to have a very sexy word for it. So artificial intelligence sounds like maybe it might eat us for lunch, but it's unlikely to, and it's just kind of a fancier word dressed up. So ChatGPT and DALL-E are powered of versions of GPT 3.5 and GPT-4. That's the technology behind those systems, and that's what a lot of newsrooms can plug into through OpenAI's APIs, the things that allow you to plug into the system itself. And the thing that journalists find very upsetting about this technology is, one, it doesn't tell you the source. And journalists like sources. I like sources. We like to be able to point back. It just kind of spits out something and doesn't tell you where it got it from. And the same input does not always mean the same output. You can ask it to summarize a story 10 times. You will get 10 different summaries. Next slide, please. So I started at the Associated Press in August of 2021 with my colleague Ernest Kung. We were brought on through a Knight Foundation grant. Knight Foundation funds a lot of journalism experiments and projects. And this was before anybody cared about this topic, or fewer people cared about this topic. So we were using funds. We were funded externally on a topic that fewer people cared about. So we had a big playground for quite a while. The first 18 months were total bliss because we really wanted to see, the mandate was, what are U.S. local newsrooms doing around artificial intelligence? We know through the Reuters Oxford Institute annual innovation report, global newsrooms, and national newsrooms are experimenting with AI because they can afford to. But local newsrooms just can't afford the risk that's involved with experimenting. Things that they take on have to go well and do well. So what we discovered was that local newsrooms could benefit the most from tools like artificial intelligence. Part of that is because their newsroom size has shrunk, but their coverage area has expanded because newsrooms have closed. So the only way to bridge that gap, meaning too much information and too wide a swath to get that information out to, is to use a co-pilot, basically. And artificial intelligence can be really good at building workflow efficiencies. They had concern that their tech stack that they already have was wobbly, and they didn't want to add another one. They also said that they had been burned by technology companies before, technology companies that underdeliver, overcharge, and then they just don't get they don't produce what they say they were going to do, or they get bought up by a bigger company and change. So newsrooms are not like, can you show us another new tool? They're like, we've had enough of the tools. So I think that there's a big concern of trust in adding yet another layer of complexity to something that's already rickety. And a lot of journalists made decisions around a content management system for their website 20 years ago and are still regretting that decision. So it's like regret on top of regret is like it just brings up a lot of emotions, which it seems like, why does artificial intelligence bring up emotions? But it really does. People have some deep feelings about it. So we did this research. We sent out 32 questions. We got almost 200 responses back from news leaders in every state. We decided to write this report. We call it a groundbreaking report because, again, no one had really known what was happening at the local level. And while this is U.S. specific, I think we've trained people from all over the world, or talked to people from all over the world, and there are many similarities. Especially in Brazil, there's a lot of news deserts, just like the U.S., and a concentration of media ownership, and so there's a lot of parallels. Next slide, please. So once we had all this juicy data and we shared it in a report, we decided we needed to teach journalists where their knowledge deficits and interests were. So we developed a 6-unit online course. It's still available for free at ai.ap.org. It's available in English only, and we had more than 100 newsrooms, local newsrooms, participate, and we taught across the news value chain. So news gathering, production, distribution, and business operations. Next slide, please. And so then the other part, so the project was in 3 stages. The first one was understanding the local news landscape, teaching to those knowledge deficits and interests. And then the third was to actually build technology. So we opened up a pitch process. We received 43 pitches. none of them were like, oh my gosh, I've never heard of something like that. All of them really answered or really asked to have help with the data collection and distribution of it, essentially. So school lunch menus, the grain report in Iowa. We got 5 requests for police blotter items. This is always a weird thing to explain. In the U.S., there are police incident reports that are public record, and it is often a very strong reason why people resubscribe to their newspaper or continue to subscribe, because they can see that there was a robbery at this corner, or this neighborhood has had a lot of car attacks, or attacks on like windshields being broken or whatever. So it's a very strange offering, but it is an offering nonetheless. And again, it helps drive subscriptions. There's a lot of bad practices around this, where in the U.S. you don't have the right to be forgotten online. So some newsrooms publish someone's name, ethnicity, age. We felt like if we were distributing this tool, we could help build better practices around that and discourage the use of names, ethnicities, age, and things like that, because those things really don't matter. And maybe someone was arrested but then let go and they weren't charged, but their name still is associated with that. So we just felt like we could build in better practices with that. So the items with an asterisk have a generative AI component to it. So the first item was from Michigan Radio. And so this project takes public meetings from YouTube and Vimeo. Those links provides an automated transcript and then summarizes it and identifies keywords. So if you're looking for potholes at the city government meeting, when are they going to fix all the potholes? It'll tell you in minute 17, they talked about it 20 times. So it provides a shortcut for reporters. Again, it is no substitution for being there in person, but sometimes people are covering more than one municipality, and those meetings are happening at the same time. The second one was automated weather reports in Spanish for El Vocero de Puerto Rico. Their team usually took 3 to 4 people to produce these weather alerts that a hurricane was coming, that it's time to move to a different place on the island. And that's at a time when they need reporters doing other work. They did not automate it before because the National Weather Service says that they offer Spanish translation when they can. And that's not good enough. We have to have it all the time. And so we automated this. What's interesting is we use sort of a baby version of AI. It's why I call it that. It's the beginnings of artificial intelligence with using a data set that we're getting in and a template that is provided. So we tried generative AI with this, and we thought we don't want to take a chance. And so if you ever want to do a project that is automated, this templatized, spreadsheet-driven type of artificial intelligence called natural language generation is really a better way to go. Similar to that is the police blotter. We wanted to make sure it was right every single time, and so developed a template for that so that the items would just be filtered into a content management system, and then the editor could choose the order of priority of those. We have an email sorting and classification for broadcast stations in particular. They have like an info@wfmz.com. Email address, and through that they receive all kinds of things: spam, press releases, emails, tips, all kinds of things. So this email sorting classification system declares whether it's newsworthy, not newsworthy, or maybe. And so that maybe funnel is a lot smaller than it used to be for the person who has to check it. It used to be 500, 1,000 emails a day that somebody has to filter through. So this provides that system in order to expedite the identification of newsworthy things. This particular system uses data science and is tuned for that newsroom's level of interest. So if something happens with the mayor in that town, for example, it will identify it as newsworthy. In your town, the mayor is a different person, so you would have to tune that system for your newsroom, if that makes sense. Then we have video summarization. The TV station KSAT in Texas produces a lot of additional video that never gets on air. So this was a way to take those, like an interview with a person of interest, and takes that interview, provides a transcript, and then summarizes it for consideration for the website. So that's a way to generate content for the website that otherwise wouldn't be added to their systems. So all 5 of these projects are available for free for newsrooms to use. The first one with Michigan Radio, you have to apply, and that's an external website. The other 4 are their code base and their case studies are on GitHub, and you're able to use those for your newsrooms. With all of these projects, we partnered with universities, university students, and a faculty advisor who produced these projects. I recommend if you work for a newsroom and it doesn't have the capacity to have technologists on staff, that is sometimes a good resource is a local university. So next slide, please. So large newsrooms like AP. We produce 3,000 photos a day and 2,000 articles a day. Our systems are built for industrial strength, and every widget in the whole pipeline of AP's article making process, for example, is complicated. And everything, if you change one thing, there'll be 10 dependencies you hadn't counted on. So will innovation happen first at AP? Some innovation will. But where we're seeing the most innovation is with small local newsrooms, people who own their newsrooms, people who are like, I don't have the staff that I need, but I really want to be able to power more information for my community. So here are some examples of how local newsrooms in the U.S. are using this technology. This is from Lost Coast Outpost, and a guy named Hank Sims runs this website. He developed the website. He takes meeting agenda minutes and then summarizes it. In addition, he offers, because ChatGPT 3.5 offers this, he offers it, you could read it as a sea shanty or as Scooby-Doo or as a pirate. I don't know if you'd like to read it like that, but I think it's a level of whimsy that I think like this is what can make technology fun and slightly annoying, but also fun. So I like that he's added that. And it's his website. He can do that. You will probably not see AP articles being read as a sea shanty anytime soon. He also said, we have an image issue, meaning we have a City Hall story again. We have used the same photo of City Hall 100 times. That doesn't get prioritized in search, and it doesn't make our website look interesting or distinctive. So he's using DALL-E to create images for his website. And he notes in the cut line that this was created by DALL-E. And again, these are, is it right for your newsroom? I don't know, but these are ways for Hank. I said, what about the artists in your area? He said, I've never contracted an artist in the area. He's like, usually I'm on deadline. I have to publish this story in the next, 10 minutes. And DALL-E cost about 5 cents for me to produce this image. The Agendizer, to do that automation, that costs him about $10 a month to run. And those prices are suppressed right now. There's what's nice about the time we're living in is there's about 4 companies that are trying to vie for the top spot, and it is suppressing the cost of these tools. So it is really helpful for local newsrooms to be able to experiment because the costs are low, and it's super easy. If you can bake a cake, you can work generative AI. It is really that simple. It is about following a recipe and understanding how this information is working in the back, so that you can understand, so that you can make it do what you want on the front end, if that makes sense. Next slide, please. So this is an example. Nieman Lab is an industry publication in the U.S. online, run through Harvard, and I noticed back in March of last year, they started using Midjourney to create their hero images. If you ever remember, if you follow this website, they used to have the same hero image every time. What I think is interesting about this is they not only mentioned the tool that they used, but the prompt that they used. And I think that's a level of transparency that's really useful to readers. It builds trust that, about how this system was prompted and the system that you used for it. Next slide, please. This is a video. Before we play it, so Semaphore is an online publication with global ambitions and footprint. They have an interview with someone here in Ukraine, but they don't have B-roll from Ukraine. So you'll see at the beginning, it very clearly states that they are using generative AI to create this B-roll. They're also using it in the color palette of the website. So I think that's interesting. But if we want to roll like maybe 20 seconds of it, that would be great.
Я Сергей Сотниченко, житель Ирпеня. Здесь как раз конкретно, здесь была серая зона, это была нейтральная полоса. Вот там направо была украинская армия, вот там вот слева была русская, посередине здесь летали бомбы, мины. Бомбы, мины, бомбы, мины, бомбы, мины, бомбы. И так вот в течение дня постоянно. Сосед мой пошел заряжать аккумулятор, вот здесь вот была машина. И он сказал мне вечером, говорит, пойду я, наверное, с этой машины вытащу аккумулятор, подзарядить телефоны, потому что все телефоны сели, света нет.
So that to me was a very compelling use. I hope Semaphore had lots of conversations about doing it. The person who did that video, she lives in Australia. She calls herself a prompt artist, and she used Stable Diffusion. It took her about 40 hours of work to create those B-rolls. So newsrooms at the local level in particular are using ChatGPT. They're using it to generate summaries and create outlines, keywords, adding hashtags, headline brainstorming, rapid construction of HTML. The systems, if you use just the system off the shelf, and if you're working on a sensitive story, I wouldn't recommend putting it into the cloud. And they are often using the data that you're entering in for training. So if you're working on a scoop or a story that's particularly sensitive, I would not recommend using it in a tool like ChatGPT. There's also Bard and Claude that's available in the US. I know that availability varies from region to region and country to country. But sometimes figuring out for yourself, maybe Bard has a better headline offerings to you than ChatGPT. So next slide, please. So my job is to explain or to understand for AP how AP might be able to use generative AI and other technologies, how our members and customers might be able to use it as well. So I get to talk a lot about how cool this is or how useful it can be. And I do think it is cool and I do think it is useful. There is the other side that is real and important to know about that I don't get to talk about as much, and that's the concerns about AI. One of the concerns is the reporting that is often done around it can make it can build a hysteria in the public around some of the outputs that come. Oftentimes, it's a terrible prompt that renders an awful output. And people are trying to expect it to write something that it's not meant to write. For example, there was a story about how a rabbi tried to use ChatGPT to write the sermon, and guess what? It has no soul. Well, it's data science, so of course it doesn't have a soul. So that's not a good use of it. A better use of the technology is to take a story you have written and be in receivership of a headline or a summarization. But you have to be the one who gives the information to it in order to get a better output. You can also work on the prompting. Syl Hamilton, who he and I co-taught a massive open online course for the University of Texas, he says, ask it not to lie, because that reduces the amount of confabulations or hallucinations that it produces. So ask it to be truthful, and it might improve your responses. As I mentioned earlier, if you're reporting on this topic, please try and be grounded in the reporting. Be very cautious if someone says that there's going to be artificial general intelligence and it's going to best humans. Who is saying that, and how is it driving their profits? So it's very easy to run with the press release from the company that stands to benefit from some of the hype or a lot of the hype. So just really ask tough questions, and you don't have to be a data scientist to ask tough questions. There was a reporting team in Florida that asked a sheriff's department. So a sheriff's department was using its data set and data from a school to identify pre-criminals. They were using absentee records, grades, if they had jobs. And so they decided to harass people it's harassment. I mean, they would show up at people's houses to see where they were, to see if they were out of trouble, because they wanted to make sure to not let criminality happen. And this reporting team asked some very basic questions to the sheriffs, like, where is this data coming from? What are your inputs and outputs from it? Very simple things that you would ask anybody who's trying to, who you're reporting on. And the story just kind of collapsed, and they won a Pulitzer Prize for that story because it did show that this sheriff's department was harassing teenagers based on this data that the school handed over to them. So again, if you don't understand these even on a base level, how these technologies are being used, you cannot speak truth to power, because power is using these technologies. So you have to understand them on a very basic level and ask. I'm always happy to ask dumb questions. What's the data? What's the training data? And then people are like, well, I mean, what are you looking for? And it's like, I think I'm onto something. Like it can be very clear very quickly that. Municipalities, law enforcement, banking, hospitals don't understand how that data is trained and don't understand the outputs that it's getting. But they did believe the salesperson who said, we can identify criminals for you before they happen. So across every beat, artificial intelligence is. So whatever you're covering, there is a component of artificial intelligence across that beat. So the large language models, which is what the backbone of ChatGPT is, it's built on a large language model. It's ingested the best and the worst of the internet, but it doesn't tell you where it's coming from. It's often incomplete. It is, I probably don't have to tell this room, it's definitely a white Western English language focus. It is by no means comprehensive of the human experience. It is unlicensed, and there is, most of it's unlicensed. The Associated Press does have a licensing agreement with OpenAI, but that's for a limited amount of data for a limited amount of time. And there's no transparency from the companies about where this information is coming from. There's also the environmental strain that this technology causes. It takes computing centers, vast amounts of computing of electricity and water to cool that electricity to power these language models. So it's not without a toll. And there's one data center that's in Arizona, which just means you have to use more and more water where there is less and less water to keep it cool. The one that is the cheapest to run is in Iowa because it doesn't have as many hot months. So it's like stuff like that you wouldn't think would be part of this conversation, but is. There are IP issues going through the U.S. courts right now around, the technology companies' ability to sweep up this information and to use it for a different purpose. The New York Times wrote has a really interesting case. In the past, these copyright issues against big tech have largely been settled. There's 4 components to copyright in the U.S. The first 2 components, does it make it something brand new? Like, is it transformative? And the answer on this one is probably so. The fourth part is, will this upend an industry? And I think that is really where, to me, the case for the New York Times rests. It is likely to upend, the journalism industry, if not necessarily just because of the text, because of the referrals. Generative search is coming, and in some places is already there, and that will summarize someone's question or input rather than direct them to a website for more information. So those things are going to be debated. It's unclear how long this is going to take, and if they'll end up getting some kind of licensing agreement. There's also no regulation in the U.S. Some is coming from Europe. I'll be interested to see how that plays out. GDPR, as you probably know, also affects websites all over the world. So we'll see what kind of imprint Europe can have. Some of this stuff, a lot of people are pointing back to Napster. If you remember from the mid to late 90s, Napster just decided to share everybody's music, and the court said, no, you can't do that. So we'll see. That seems like that would be an extreme situation, but one that is possible, that anybody using OpenAI's APIs might have to cease and desist. So it's been done before. We'll see if it happens. Next slide. So just how this moment is different. Generative AI, natural language generation, which is how AP pioneered automated earnings reports in 2014. It takes a data set from the New York Stock Exchange and through a template creates a news brief, just like we did for the Puerto Rico weather alerts and how we did it for the police blotter items. So that information has to be the same in each column every time. So it's a very reliable, stable system. And if you go to the next slide, I vision generative AI as sort of a hoverboard as opposed to a train on a track. What do I mean by that? Generative AI doesn't care if your information is on a CSV file, a PDF, an image, Word docs, multiple languages. It will take it all and have it make sense. And I think that is really the power and the promise of generative AI. It is what helped fuel the reporting project for the Panama Papers to be able to go through enormous data sets. I think that is what could be really helpful, and that is how this moment is different and why people are getting all keyed up about this technology, is because it's enabling us to do things we've only dreamed about doing with information. Next slide. So I'll kick it to you now. If you have questions, but also how you're using generative AI, and if anybody online has a question.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Amy. So if you have a question online, please raise your digital hand. And back of the room first.
Yeah, I was wondering. Hi, Leonard Sandberg, and I'm with the Dutch Financial Daily. You mentioned the competition we have now between the 4 companies that are really trying their best to, win this. And that because of that, the costs are down. Does that also pose a risk for local newsrooms where in the future the costs will rise and they have become dependent on using these tools?
Absolutely. Yes, 100%. And that is always the worry, and that is what has always bared out. Journalists start using a tool, they really like it, and then Google says, we're not supporting that tool anymore. So they've seen that with tools, they've seen it with the prices. They could also decide not to offer any public APIs. They could close that down entirely. And then suddenly it's only, blue chip companies that are able to afford, I'm thinking like sectors that make more money than journalism, like banking and medicine and things like that. But yeah, that is the big, that to me is one of the biggest concerns, and I have written about this on LinkedIn before about the need for radical collaboration in our industry, and that starts with a journalism-based large language model and extends to having our own server farms, so that we can have a true press freedom. Because as long as our information is going up to clouds that are served by these 4 companies who we're supposed to be reporting on, we won't have a true press freedom until that has happened. But that is a massive amount of money and a lot of agreement. Yeah.
Amy, before we move on, can you please say, what is API?
I cannot remember the names of I can't remember the acronyms, but basically an API is, think about it as a plug into a wall. It allows you access to data and its superpowers for your technology. So it's a way into another website or another website's technology.
Okay. Right here, please.
Benoît Georges from Les Echos, French business newspaper. API is Application Programming Interface.
Thank you.
That helps big systems to be plugged in with many applications.
Yeah.
My question is about, I have many questions, but the first main important would be, how do we cooperate with companies like OpenAI, for example? You have, on the one hand, AP, as you said, has a licensing agreement, and I would like to know more about it. And on the other hand, you have the Wall Street Journal the New York Times didn't find an agreement and decided to sue. Yeah. And it reminds me of like 20 years ago or 10 years ago when newspapers started collaborating with either Google or Facebook, and they had agreements that were supposed to give more money to the press. In Europe, they forced them to give money to conglomerates of newspapers, and that's not a lot of money versus what they lost due to the boom of the internet. And now, what decided AP to cooperate? What should be the reason and the good reason to do it and not to do it?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, people have asked, do you think it was a good idea for AP to do it? It's like, we'll know more in 5 years. I don't know. Like, I think, I will say lawsuits are time-consuming and expensive. And time-consuming, 7 to 10 years, millions of dollars, lots of turmoil, only to end up with a licensing agreement. So, or, being able, I think the New York Times, and if you read its lawsuit, it wants to be entered into the canon of journalism. Like, this is how the New York Times is going to defend the journalism industry against a big tech company. But I mean, you're right. The tech companies have made inroads into countries where they think they're going to be regulated. They throw $1 million at it, $2 million, rounding errors for these billion and trillion dollar companies. So, journalism organizations have accepted that. Why did the Times decide to sue? I think because they feel they have the time and the money. And if you look at the lawsuit, they look at the things that are copied, and like there's like a whole page of red copied and like 2 words that aren't. No one else has been able to reproduce that, so that'll be something that'll probably be brought up in court too. But did I answer your questions about like why?
No. And I would like to. What is the subject of the agreement? What exactly? AP accepted and refused from.
Right. So
exactly I repeat for the people online.
Yeah.
What is accepted and what's the content of the agreement?
Yeah.
Between
I
AP
don't
and
know.
OpenAI?
I honestly don't. I mean, like,
wow,
the thing is, it's a licensing agreement. And our members and customers include the New York Times. I don't know how much the New York Times pays. You know what I mean? And that's the way I think it should be. So it's a licensing agreement, mostly. We did get some tech credits through that so that we can experiment. And we have, in the agreement, it says that AP and OpenAI will collaborate on a public offering, meaning something, like maybe display showcase that they have for Google, but it's unclear. And what I like about that is that they didn't say you must build this. It is really a blue sky, like what could we create together? Because they don't know how to communicate with people, in the way that journalists can. So I think, that has a lot of opportunity. But yeah, you're right. I mean, we've agreed to get along with them as much as we can in the last 10 years. Google has made the most significant inroads, but also gets called out about it a lot more. So maybe more, Apple has never entered into the fray, and they don't get called out as much. So
Can we come to this side of the room, please? Right in the back. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Silvina Steri in Pencil. I work for Radio France International, RFE. And my first question relates to those 4 companies that you mentioned. Do you remember them? You have their names handy to let us know which companies are those? Mm-hmm. And the next question is, when you show us that video by Semaphore, that the disclosure that they had used, an artificial content generator or B-roll generator was really very visible. What for print, do you have to have that kind of disclosure if you use it, if you use language content generator, for example? And the last one is, do you see that we are already past the stigma in using these type of things as journalists? Because not long ago, when you could say, for example, that to a colleague, like, are you using, it's something that kind of diminishes your language skills or your style or even, your approach to the profession.
Mm-hmm. So the companies that I see who are in the turf war, and please, you seem to be on top of things, so let me know if I forget one. But Amazon, it's the people who have, it's the companies that have the hosting servers themselves. So that includes Amazon, Microsoft, which made a $13 billion investment into OpenAI. So, and I think in Europe they're being tried together as one entity. Google and a company called Anthropic, which I think uses Google's servers. Yeah, and Meta. Oh, thank you. How can I forget Meta? Because they changed their name, but Meta as well. So those are the big companies. Meta has the Llama models that they've released. They say they're open source. There are aspects to it that I don't think that is entirely true. But they see they have been more sharing in this moment in the past year than the other companies. Language disclosure for anything that you run. So the Associated Press, at the bottom of our earnings reports, we have a tagline that mentions the data source and the company that we partnered with to make that happen. I think that's only fair, to let audiences know. Now, are we going to get all nitpicky around headlines? Headline editors have never been credited before. And I've never seen a headline where I didn't adjust one word or two from one of the generative AI models. So I think that's getting a little too precious with it. The other thing about the stigma, which is also connected to the language disclosure, I think in the next year, our apps that we use are just going to have this stuff embedded into it, and we're going to not talk about it anymore. We're just going to accept part of it. So if you use Google Suite, if you use Microsoft Office Suite, it's just going to be part of it. I don't know, just like the not fact checker, but the predictive text on your phone when it really doesn't understand that you meant a cuss word or something in there. It's going to be maybe a small annoyance that doesn't quite understand, but it might help you send an email 30 seconds faster. Yay, productivity.
Over here, please.
Hello, I'm Felix Holtermann of Handelsblatt, Germany's Business Daily. Thank you, Irina. I found it very interesting, the concrete examples that you showed us today, how newspapers can use AI for better storytelling, for deeper research, right? Could you also perhaps give us some color on how do we as journalists find out if people try to fake stuff with the help of AI. So we are now going into, I think, a super election year, right? 2024, if I'm not mistaken, we have 60 elections around the world, the US presidential election being the most prominent one. We already are seeing examples in the US, in Germany, in Europe, elsewhere, where, for example, fake pictures are created with the help of AI, what Taylor Swift together with Jeffrey Epstein and many others. And so far, these tools, right, that the big giants that you just mentioned, that they provide us to look into that, they are not very good in finding out which pictures are fake, which are not fake, or which, for example, emails maybe are wrong, which documents are forged. Could you give us some color on that? What do you expect from AI in the US presidential election, other elections in 2024, and what do you do? Second question at AP to fight being victim of AI frauds and so on as a journalist.
Yeah, so 4 billion people, I think, around the world are going to go and vote, and 1 billion in India are at least registered. I mean, it's staggering. So far, we have not seen generative AI move the needle on any election. It's not to say it's not going to happen, but of the 15,000 videos, deepfake videos were scanned by a research lab, and 96% were porn. So just to say, we're very base in our needs online, and porn has always been a driver of innovation. But I think I do think the public is smarter now than they were before. They are less believing of things that they see online, and maybe that makes them cynical to not believe anything. But I know that a lot of the easy news reports are it's going to upend everything, but I don't think it can. Like, it's the points of friction to post things online still remain. It's not like you can spam something. You can have a networked community spread terrible stuff. Bolsonaro was very effective through WhatsApp. So I'm not saying it can't happen. There are two things that are specific to the U.S. That are bigger concerns for me. One is the platforms have reduced or eliminated their trust and safety programs or their teams. I think YouTube is down. The New York Times reported in February last year, YouTube is down to one person on handling their global effort, and that's the second biggest search engine online. So that's a problem. So nobody's watching the House. The other thing is this is spearheaded by the Republican House members, an attack on funding for disinformation research. So there are fewer dollars because foundations are worried about giving money to researchers who seemed left-leaning. And so we will likely know less about this election than we did before because trust and safety teams are gone, and that backstop of research is also disappearing. There are still people who are doing it, but it's just less funded. So that's what I'm concerned about. And if you remember, after the 2016 election in the U.S., it was 2 years before we found out about Cambridge Analytica, and I think that was from Carol Caldwell at The Guardian. So it was like it wasn't even a U.S. company or news organization that broke that story. So these things take a while. I think that I'm worried more about down-ballot elections in the U.S., the elections that don't get covered on a national level, that there's a lot of robocalls in the U.S., and it's very easy to fake somebody's voice. And is a local journalist equipped to see a pattern and to see that this is somebody saying they're going to raise taxes and they never said that, those things are going to be harder to identify. So I'm worried about the smaller things that could move the needle locally. But I'm always eager to be a student of this space and to learn with others. But it seems like the points of friction remain on platforms to where mass seeding of that conversation is not that it's not possible, but it's less probable. Yeah.
What should journalists do maybe to prevent that to some extent? The local journalists or your journalists from AP you talked about to become victim of stuff like that?
Yeah. So at the Associated Press, we have 3,500 members, and then more customers in addition to that. We are developing a platform called AP Verify around image and video verification. And we did market research for this and discovered that local newsrooms in the U.S. Are not verifying images or videos that much. They are fine to run an image that looks like it might have been taken on that day and maybe wasn't. So what we're trying to do is maybe build that reflex for people to say, you can check where this video came from. You can check where this image came from. And then have a help. The ideal scenario is for us to have a help desk so that people, and that people can help each other. So a reporter in Florida says, I'm seeing the same thing that you're seeing in Wisconsin. Because these things get networked and circulated that way in different states, and especially states that are incredibly important to the election. Yeah.
Right here in the front, second row. Thank you.
Hi, this is Tamami Shimizu from Nikkei newspaper, a Japanese publication. And like you said, thanks to New York Times case, issues in the courtrooms, battles, and like you lined out, there are kind of two main issues here: whether the usage of the previous articles is defined as a fair use, and the second one is whether this is going to upend the industry. So I want to get your opinion, or maybe AP's standpoint, whether they think this is a fair use as well as it's going to upend the industry in the long term.
I mean, AP went for licensing. Our work is not, all of our work, it's not free, easy, and sometimes safe to produce, and it deserves compensation. I also think our work is more valuable than even we have imagined because of model collapse. Model collapse on these language models happens when the model is trained on other artificial intelligence. So how do they get rid of that? They have to go after, premium data sources. Who produces premium data? We do. I mean, I think we produce articles and features and reporting and investigations, not data or content. But the platforms see it as data, and they need to pay for it because our work is good. And the difference in quality between ChatGPT 3.5 and 4 is phenomenal. 4 is when they stop telling us what they used to add into it. Coincidentally. So I think it's clear, I think, from AP's position that our work deserves to be licensed. Yeah.
Right here, please.
Hi, I'm Sue from 동아일보, South Korean newspaper, and thank you for your insightful presentation. And following your presentation, I understand that education is very important for all journalists as well. So I'm curious about, do you have any in-training education program for all journalists available? And
yes, I do. So the University of Texas Knight Center for the Americas has, I was lucky enough to be a co-lead on this course with Syl Hamilton. I think it's a nice primer for how this technology does and doesn't work with journalism. So that's free and available. It's available in English, Spanish, and Brazilian Portuguese. And then at ai.ap.org, we have many of our online course materials still available for free. So that's, I think, is a good primer. We're also doing, and maybe we can get the emails later, but we also are going to do a series this year of how to report on AI. And that is something we have. One of our lead reporters on this topic, Garance Burke, will be leading on those discussions, and she's top-notch. She's done a lot of global investigations around COVID restrictions and how artificial intelligence was sort of seized to continue those after COVID.
Right over here, please, in the next to last row, third person. Please raise your hand so Ryan can. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kosuke Hata from a Japanese daily Mainichi. Does AP have a plan to use AI for investigative journalism field? For instance, analyzing satellite image or big data by developing own software. Thank you.
So not yet, but I do think if it's not AP, journalism organizations need to be the developers of their own technologies and the infrastructure, because I think our newsrooms at this point trust us in terms of we've been around 187 years. We're not going anywhere. If we bring you technology, we're going to be there to support it. So I think that would be a huge move and the right move, I think, toward independence, so that we can also, when I worked before AP, I worked at First Draft, a nonprofit in the U.S. that trained journalists on how to identify, verify, and report on mis and disinformation. And we were using tools that marketing teams use. There's hardly any tools that are written just for journalists, as I'm sure that's probably why you asked the question, right? We are usually like shoehorning in our ideas into a marketing platform or a social scheduling platform to get the information out of it that we need around, especially around sourcing for on social media. So, yeah, that would be great.
So I'd just like to thank everyone for being here today. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you, Amy Reinhardt of the Associated Press. You can catch this briefing and transcripts and all previous briefings on fpc.state.gov. That's all for today. Thank you.
Thank you.